Alrighty, today I'm going to be covering the Richmond sector. We had an almost 600 person event over in Richmond, and it was a massive tournament. It's the first major tournament we've had since the suspensions for Django, Triple Dark Raid, and DJ, so we're getting a lot of information about what's succeeding, and I'm going to be covering that. So before we get going, please hit that subscribe button, and if you're looking for some more content from me, do check out my Patreon. Let's get right to it. So I'm going to be covering the event, just the whole thing. We're going to be breaking down what overperformed, what underperformed. There's going to be a lot of charts and graphs. We're going to see matchup percentages for all the top decks. So we're really going to get a good idea, at least as good an idea as we can get from one event as to what's doing well. And finally, I will also be covering the top 8 and looking at some deck lists. So let's just get started. Day 1, 598 players. You can see the field in front of you. It was 10% Sabine, 9% Quinlan, 7% Cad, 7% Han, and then it drops down to with Anakins and Lukes, and then drops down even further. So the field, as far as day 1 was concerned, was very wide. Tons of different decks. The most represented deck being Sabine, only at 10%, so about 60 players. That's not huge, and I think people took an opportunity here to kind of play whatever they wanted. We had major shakeup in the tournament structure, just with how the bans, the suspensions for Django, and the other cards shaped up. So it's kind of unclear, at least initially, what might do well. And we did have kind of an idea. I made a video last week about what I thought were going to be some of the highly represented decks, and most of those were highly represented, but not by major margins, and we saw a lot of different decks get played. Right here you can see the numbers as well. Now all these charts I got from SW Competitive Hub. Do recommend you check that site out. But right here, 60 Sabine, 53 Quinlan, 42 Cads and Hans, and then it drops down even further. And I thought it would also be interesting just to see the base breakdown. So Tarkentown number 1, not much of a surprise there. Lots of Quinlan. There was a lot of Cad. They're almost all played as Tarkentown decks. But then we had Data Vault and tied with Yellow, this base Yellow 30 health, as the next most represented deck. And Data Vault did have a bit of a breakout here. And then Energy Conversion Lab in 4th. And most of that is from Sabine. All right. Now we start to really get good information. This is the day 2 breakdowns, and there was a top 64, so a little over 10% of the field, right? We had just under 600 players, and here you can see that we really start to see the meta decks overperform basically everything else. So Quinlan was 17.2% of the field, which is a jump from where it started. Qi'ra jumped, Han jumped, Sabine jumped, Cad jumped. So a lot of these decks that we kind of expected to do well prove that they did well, and most of the other stuff that was played did not, right? You see like one-ofs from everything on that third row down was one player sneaking through with a rogue deck, which is, you know, awesome. Actually, not all of them are rogue decks. Some of them did have a high representation. And then we see like a couple of these, like Anakin, a couple Anakins, a couple Hans, and a couple Kylos as well. And you're going to see a little clearer here the numbers if you want to take a look at that. But what I really want to show you is this chart. And this is the change in percentages between day 1 and day 2. So Quinlan started at 9% of the field, went up to a little over 17%. It's a very big jump. Qi'ra started at sub 4% and converted over 14%, the biggest jump. Han, Sabine, Cad all jumped in from day 1 to day 2. It's just showing you that these decks, these established decks, are powerful and they are succeeding. You would expect in a more balanced, like when everything is like balanced, right? Or like everything is equal, you would expect the blue columns to match the red columns, right? If the Quinlan was 9% of day 1, it should be about 9% of day 2. But you're seeing that that wasn't really the case. The good decks were good, and the rogue decks, well, mostly they weren't. There's one I want to call out here that is not really a rogue deck. It's Anakin. I had put this in my group 1 as far as what I thought would be highly represented, and it was highly represented. It was a little over 6%, but it converted just 3%. That's a pretty low conversion rate. It had a pretty poor event overall. On the other hand, the pilot Vader kind of overperformed. And that's maybe one to keep an eye on as a deck that might sneak into this conversation. Everything else is mostly not enough data, but we can see like the Bosks and Boba both underperformed here. Vader, Set 1 Vader and Gar Saxon all underperformed pretty heavily as well. But, you know, when it's less players overall, you're not getting as much total information. Now, this chart, I recommend if you're like really interested in like deep diving into this data, this is matchup percentages, and this is a lot of information. Now, this is for the whole event. It's not day 1 or day 2. It's combined. But you can find this on SOU Competitive Hub as well. But you can see matchup win rates for decks. So we're going to start with Quinlan. And in my previous video, which was right before this event, I had like a meta prediction. And I did say that I thought Quinlan, although I put it in Group 1 as what I thought was like one of the top meta decks, I did say that I thought its matchup spread into the other top decks wasn't very good and that it might struggle. Now, Quinlan, it did well. If you look at the event, right, it started at 9%, went to 17%. There's 2 Quinlans in the top 8. So overall, it had a good day. But if you look at these percentages, so its matchup percentages into Sabine, 41.2% negative win rate. Into Cad Bane, 43.5% negative win rate. Into Han 1 Green, 43.9%. Into Qi'ra Green, 38.5%. Now, these are the other 4 decks that we had just seen as the top converters. And Quinlan had a negative win rate into all 4 of them. So the question is, how did it do so well? Well, I think mostly it's because it was beating everything else. Like, in some ways, pretty handedly. Like, it was beating Anakin, Luke, Piet, Boba, Gar. Interesting that it had a negative win rate into Bosk Blue, but it might just be a very small sample size because there weren't a lot of Bosks. But Quinlan is notoriously pretty good into that deck. I'm sure Quinlan was beating a lot of the more rogue decks as well. So it's something you have to ask yourself, like, if this is just one data point, but when I see a data point that then also like supports what I have felt in independent testing, then I start to pay attention. And this is basically exactly what I felt. Like that Quinlan had a negative matchup into those 4 decks that I mentioned, Sabine, Cad, Han, and Qi'ra. And it did at this event, which is interesting because it's still like performed very well overall. And it's something to definitely keep an eye on. Sabine, on the other hand, has very good win rates across the board here, being favored into Quinlan, into Luke, into Gar, into Qi'ra, and only kind of splitting into Han Green, which, you know, I would think that Han Green would be more favored into Sabine, but it didn't shake up that way. Out of the top decks, the only one here that Sabine underperformed into was Cad Red. Anakin, on the other hand, did not have a good matchup spread. You can see that there. Qi'ra, which was the biggest overperformer in terms of day 1 to day 2 conversion, you can see from all the top decks, it almost had like positive into most of them, and it had like a 44% into Sabine and a 47% into Han. So like close-ish, slightly unfavored, but like incredibly favored into Quinlan, Anakin, Cad, and like Gar. You can see that as well. So it kind of supports how it ended up doing so well in the event when it was beating all these other top decks. So if you're interested in checking out, I do recommend you look at this chart on SOU Competitive Hub. All right, now we can look at the top 8. All right, so these were the 8 decks. It was a Quinlan mirror. Is the first seed and 8th seed. We had a 4 seed, 5 seed Han mono yellow into an Anakin blue Colossus. And then on the other side of the bracket, a Sabine CL against the Cad Bane Tarkin Town. And then the bottom right, my 2 teammates, Alex on Han Green and Qi'ra John Tata playing it. And shout out to them. Awesome to see a couple teammates make the top 8 at this sector. So I'm going to go in order of their finishes, and we're going to look at these decks. So in 8th place, well, it is a Quinlan. One of the Quinlans did have to lose. So you can see here, and there are going to be some similarities between the 2 decks. Like, I think both Ben and Michael, who was the other Quinlan, had the same grouping of 2 drops. You, of course, see the Force Throw, Plo Koon, like the core stuff like Cassian, Surprise Strikes, Blasters, Falcon, the whole discard package here. So Millennium Falcon, the 6-drop version, making an appearance again. It was a card that wasn't being played earlier in this set's lifespan, but you can see it here. You're going to see it in the other Quinlan list as well. I do believe, now I'm not 100% sure, but I do believe the main reason it has been added is to help in the Han Green matchup, because it is a ship that can come down and kill one of Han Green's ships in that mid game where sometimes Han can present too much of a space presence. Other than that, we got some Bamboozles in the main deck. I like that. It's good against pilot leaders. Obviously, it's good against Sabine. It has some applications into Han as well, who's piloting. So it's just a good card. You see 2 Sparks in this main deck. I like that too. In the sideboard, we see some Chams for the ramp matchups. We see Disabling Fang Fighters, which I think you can play main deck as well, especially if you want to help in that Han Green matchup. The Shadowed Hover Tank is a good card against Sabine. Some Jam Communications for control. And 1 Mace Windu for that top end. So Quinlan, there's not tons of changing here in this Quinlan deck from how it started the season, but it has been able to make some changes now that Django is gone and now that like DJ is no longer around. Maybe there's some tweaks that you can make to this deck to help. But I do think this deck needs a little bit of help in general right now if we're going to see a meta that props up things like Sabine and Qi'ra and Han Green and even Cad Tarkentown, all of which pose very different challenges for Quinlan. And Quinlan might not be the deck that wants to have like a bullseye on it, right? It's Public Enemy number 1 might not be the best spot for Quinlan because it is kind of a reactive aggro deck, and it has a hard time accounting for everything. All right. In 7th place, we had Mephisto playing Cad Tarkentown. I really like Cad in general. I think its matchups were pretty solid. It does struggle a little bit into control decks, into things like Qi'ra, but here's that a Tarkentown deck that plays 3 main deck red cards, and they are 3 Ruthless Raiders. I see no IG-2000. There's one in the sideboard. I really like the card, but I see that Mephisto's included Jabba the Hutt's in the main deck and might not have been able to fit more 4 costs. There's Bamboozles in the main deck. We see that card a lot. Maybe now's a good time to add my commentary on how I don't think that card should be killing pilot leaders. I think it's a main reason we see so few pilot leaders even like playable, because yellow decks are, a lot of them are near the top of the meta, Quinn, Cad, Han, and they're all playing 0-cost ways to kill your leader. It's not great. But yeah, like Cad Tarkentown is another deck that has been able to evolve a little bit now that Django's not around. You see in the sideboard, Devastators, so just more direct damage in conjunction with those Ruthless Raiders. Some ramp with the Cham Syndulla against the other ramp decks. Lurking Ties to help with the control decks. I like the Lurking Tie. I think that's a very solid sideboard card. It's not Underworld, but you need to find some ways to bolster this deck into control strategies, because it is probably where it's weakest. All right, at 6th place, my teammate John with Qi'ra, Data Vault, and we've been working on this deck for a while. I talk about Qi'ra a lot because I play Qi'ra a lot, and this is kind of a new evolution for Qi'ra. It's not as mid-rangey as the ECL version. It is very much a Super Laser Blast deck. You can see 3 of them in the main deck. With that Data Vault, you have decreased your odds of drawing Ramp, number 1, and Overwhelming Barrage, number 2. Those are like the main downsides for going 60. Most of the other stuff is pretty redundant. So, like, other than maybe like turn 1 Purging, I don't think you get punished as much in that regard. But we added a ton of redundancy into this deck, right? You see 3 Vader, 3 Maul, 3 Reinforcement Walkers, 4 Star Destroyers, 3 Super Laser Blasts. The removal's been bolstered. So you are just kind of bulking up the deck. And that extra life in a Qi'ra deck like this, it's a bit of a bigger deal than it seems. Like, it's not just the 3 life, it's how it changes like breakpoints for your opponent, right? If your opponent has a 6 power unit and you're at 24, that is no longer a one-shot kill, and it can change entirely how an entire turn goes, because you can now play cards without having to claim early, and your opponent has to respect the fact that you can play cards and can't just like claim and one shot you, right? It's those kinds of changes in the way that people have to play into you, and the breathing room you get to actually deploy your strategy is where it like shines the most. You see Lieutenant Charlton in this main deck. Now, it is a heavy green deck. This was added a couple days before the event, and it's mostly there to help against Sabine. That's like the primary use of it. There are situations where it's clunky. Frankly, that will happen in this kind of deck because it is a heavy green deck, and even if you plan for him, there's a chance you will draw runner green cards the turn you were planning on playing him. But you're not looking for him to be a 6/6 in this deck. It's mostly you want him as a 5/5 if you can get that. And he can be a tremendous help in some situations. But other than that, this is Qi'ra. This is a deck that doesn't really fold too much. It doesn't really stomp anything, although it did kind of stomp some stuff today. It mostly wants to feast on like these hero mid-rangey or villain mid-rangey decks. That's where it like almost always will just have a better matchup because its top end is going to be better, and those decks aren't usually quick enough to get through Qi'ra's life. And of course, the Qi'ra flip, I think, has at this point established itself as just a much more useful thing to have than most other villain blue controlling strategies can present. Unless you are doing something like a pure hard control strategy or going all the way to a Palpatine style deck. All right, in 5th place, we had a mono yellow Han by John M. And, this is, frankly, this is the rogue deck of the top 8 because mono yellow Han was not played very much. Almost all Han players have moved to green, which I do think is like probably the more powerful overall strategy. But mono yellow Han is quick. This deck is definitely fast. I mean, not many aggro decks can race the card Cunning. Cunning is still king for racing, and this deck looks very similar to what this deck looked like when DJ was in it, but you now don't have DJ, which means people don't have to respect that early tech. People don't have to respect that flip turn into DJ. It gives a lot of decks that were getting punished by that, things like Anakin, for instance, other like higher costed leaders, a lot of breathing room. Since they don't have to respect that, they can play into this deck much differently. But once again, you see Bamboozles in the main deck. You see a new card from set 4 that I really like in Mandalorian. I think a very good dual threat for a deck like this. And a lot of main deck discard and hand disruption, so similar to Quinlan in that regard. Of course, no force throw, but you do get Bodhi to kind of shore that up, and Cunning as well can discard. And the sideboard's very interesting because it's basically the 3rd copy of like almost every card that's already in the deck, other than the 2 Leias and the 2 Gamorrean guards. The Gamorreans are pretty good into Sabine. I think the Leia could be good into basically any deck trying to race you. All right, next up, 4th place, the Anakin Colossus. And there's always going to be maybe a little bit of a debate as whether or not this deck should be playing Colossus, because it is a real cost. I think Colossus is a bigger cost to deck construction and gameplay than Data Vault is. But, you get more health, so that's important. Anakin here, Phoenix decided to really go into the like potential of like burst kills with Anakin. You see two lightsabers and 2 bravados, so it does give this deck a bit of like a combo-y potential. I don't think it's like the plan into every strategy, but it is nice to have that potential. And because you are starting with less cards, a deck like this is building on some more ways to draw. So you see C-3POs in this deck, you are seeing the Red Squadron X-Wing, and you're seeing Yodas. So these are all ways to kind of try to get back some of that card disadvantage. Now, I've seen a lot of these decks play Steela. It's not in this version, which I think is fine. I don't think that card is necessarily a requirement. I really like this is probably the deck that I think Cham Syndulla is best in, because in a lot of other decks, when you are ramping, especially like against Han Green, like even if you Cham when they do it, you sometimes don't get a ton out of it. And Cham, of course, can get one shot by the Han. But in a deck like this, where your leader is so difficult for them to interact with, playing Cham and being able to flip your leader the same turn as them is a massive get. And of course, it's very good into like Qi'ra decks as well, or like other villain resupply decks. But Anakin, it's like a mid-range, it's a pretty slow mid-rangey deck that uses the Anakin as a way to potentially close, or if he's not going to be your closer, he's at least presenting that mid-game threat that your opponent needs to deal with, and then it lets you curve out into Lukes and post board like crate dragons. And there's also one Resolute in this deck, an interesting card. I don't think I've ever put that card in a deck, but you know, in Anakin that card can be quite cheap to play, and I'm wondering how it performed. And in the sideboard, I like the Fang Fighters. I think that they're a card that I think you can also be main decking right now. Open Fire in the main deck is really nice. I think being able to kill Falcons on curve is just the thing you want to be able to do right now. Open Fire has been kind of absent for like a set and a half right now, as like, because when so many people moved to 5 health as the base for their turn 2 plays because of how much Tarkin Town existed, and Ping Tarkin Town specifically, Open Fire became much less good, but we are seeing kind of a rise in space aggression, and a lot of that is frontlined by Millennium Falcon, and Open Fire is a clean answer to that. All right, next, my other teammate that made the top 8. This is Alex playing Han Green, a deck that I think is absolutely fantastic. This is a deck that is not only an aggro deck that can race Sabine, it's also a deck that can outgrind a villain control deck on turn 15. So you're getting 2 very powerful things going on here. This space aggression that can be like buffed up with pilots. You see Stolen AT Hauler. It's not a card you're going to play in every matchup, but like against decks like Sabine, for instance, that card is maybe the best turn 1 they can do. You see, of course, the pilot Chewbacca and Han. Those 2 are like all-stars here. It's just that it's not really an all-in pilot deck, and I think a lot of the time people overpilot in this deck, and you don't really need to commit these pilots all the time onto units. Chewbacca is also really scary on the ground. Out of Ewing, Chewbacca plus a 2-drop is a crazy play into a lot of decks. Han Solo, of course, is a much safer pilot to just like push damage with, because he's basically just a pump. And you still see like techs in this deck. You still see U-Wings and resupply. Like, this deck can do the other thing, which is like abuse Han's ability to get a huge early advantage with its resource cheating, and then just grind you out after that. Lots of pumps, lots of damage, but lots of potential to go long. And you can see post board, the home ones are going to come in. Salvage is going to come in, which is like Palp return for this deck, essentially. 2 more confiscates. There's 1 in the main deck, and a couple sparks and a couple traitorous. And this deck, very powerful. I'd expect to see this in a lot of places. All right, in second place, we had Michael, who had an absolutely tremendous run. I believe he was undefeated going into the finals at this event. He came just short from sweeping the whole thing, but this was his Quinlan list, and you can see Disabling Fang Fighters in this main deck. I think that's a very respectable decision. Guerrilla Soldiers, a card that does add to the aggro nature of Quinlan. It's pretty nice into Sabine as well sometimes, because they will often pass turn 1 so that you can't ping their units, and then there will be nothing in play, and you can slam this and just really get an early damage advantage against Sabine. You know, there's downsides to it too. It's an incredibly weak unit. The damage, as far as like top decks are concerned, when there's units in play, it's a much less powerful card than some other things you can run there, but it does add some powerful plays early. And the 2-drop slot is the same that Ben had. All 6 of the shielded units, A-Wing and Sabine. I think these are really solid. There are other 2-drops you can play. You can play 1-drops like Greedo, which is in this sideboard, and I like that. Like, there's some matchups like Sabine, for instance, that just having a 1-drop 3-power unit is nice to have. You can see that Michael also played the Shattered Hover tank in this deck. I see 1 Cunning, 1 Change of Heart, so those are the Change of Heart almost certainly for like villain blue-green decks, but maybe for some other things as well, and Cunning for some racing, and Open Fires in the sideboard, which might also just be for bringing in against Millennium Falcon decks. And you know, the whole discard packages here. Michael played the 3rd Spark, so you see 3 Spark, 3 Ahsoka, 3 Qi'ra, 3 Force Throw, so it's all there. Also 2 Millennium Falcon, 6 drops in this one, also Bamboozles. So You know, a lot of similarities between the lists, and congrats to Michael for getting into the finals. And now for the winner, Sabine ECL by Will. True masterclass of a performance. He took down some difficult matchups on the way into that final. He beat a Cad and he beat a Han Green. And I really like this list. I think Timely Intervention, very good right now with Sabine. Metal Ceremony, Rebel Assault. We're just playing all the old school, like, ways to push damage and ways to really abuse some of the powerful cards in the deck that just want to be abused more. And Sabine's Masterpiece is a very important new addition for this deck and was basically the reason Will was able to beat the Han Green. It's kind of the best answer this deck has to a turn 1 Millennium Falcon. If you start with a green unit, you can go into Masterpiece, ambush with your ECL, put a counter on that Masterpiece. You now have a 4/4 that one-shots the Falcon, and this is kind of how you can turn the page on what Han is doing. It's one of the few ways that really flips the script on them for this deck, because otherwise it's very difficult for you to race. This deck, you know, it also playing Chewbacca and Wing Leader. It's not all in, only 2 copies of both. Also only 2 copies of Darksaber. So it's like, it's cut some of these like more situational pump stuff for just all the units. Like, it's just playing all these units and then the one draw, like the things like Timely, Rebel Assault, and Metal Ceremony. And, you know, this deck has been around for a long time. It's going to continue to be around. If you look at the sideboard here, we see a couple Confiscates, 2 Heroic Sacrifices, Fighters for Freedom. I like that. If you're expecting to be able to see shielded units, or even when that Saboteur might be helpful just to push more damage. The a Sundari Peacekeeper, the 3rd one, and that's one of the really powerful cards to be playing on turn 2 into something like a Quinlan. You like those 5 health units on turn 2 where they can't ping Tarkin Town. It's a thing you can see Sabines do quite often, is pass turn 1 into Quinlan, or just ping and see if the Quinlan will play a unit, and if the Quinlan doesn't, you just claim and slam an X5, and it's very challenging to get it removed, right? And see a couple Bright Hopes here as well in the sideboard. So, you know, a very clean Sabine list. I like the look of it. Congrats to Will for winning the Richmond sector. It was an incredible performance. All right, that's what I got for you. Let me know what you think of the results. Let me know what decks you think you'd be playing if you had another event. Love to hear it. And until next time, take care.